Greece is at risk of some risk of default because it has three strikes against it. It has very bad numbers, fiscal and debt, which however is not unusual these days, although Greece's are particularly bad. The second strike against Greece, which is probably even more important, is that there is no confidence in its ability to manage its fiscal affairs, given its track record. And here Greece stands out. And the third strike against Greece is that it suffers a common problem of many of the European periphery hit by the crisis, which is that they are unable to devalue the currency because they are part of the euro area, yet they have been losing competitiveness over many years to the powerhouse in the north, Germany in particular, but some others as well. So that's the reason that Greece is under attack at the moment. In terms of the response on the part of its European partners, I think their response has been essentially very positive, in that they have made a solemn promise to support Greece in its troubles, and implicitly other countries that run into trouble. At the same time, they have not been so far very specific about what it is that they want. And what is clear is that they're going to take quite a tough position in terms of the conditions that will be applied to any aid to Greece. And the reason for the tough conditions requiring even further fiscal adjustment is partly to get things done, because if Greece does not put its house in order, whatever aid is forthcoming will not go very far. But the other reason is political, because countries have to justify to their own taxpayers, particularly the Germans that are going to have to carry a big part of the load, the fact that they are paying, in some sense, for the irresponsibility of Greek fiscal management. This is clearly the greatest test that the euro has faced, and it comes, not surprisingly, in the middle of the worst recession in the post-war period. At the same time, I think the likelihood that the euro area will implode is extremely low at the moment, almost unthinkable in its consequences. And in the end, Greece will be supported, will be rescued if a rescue is needed. There are too many major political, business, and banking interests that want this outcome to happen. The policy response to this crisis is fundamental. It is needed, and the crisis, as always, does create an opportunity to reposition oneself for the medium term to do much better in the future. I like to think of three levels of policy: country, European, and global. And that is the order of importance. Greece needs to undertake very large-scale fiscal adjustment, widen its tax base, and reduce its entitlements, for example, extend its retirement age. It also needs to undertake far-reaching structural measures to make its labor markets more flexible, allow for some wage reduction to happen, and various steps that can be taken to increase productivity. This is in lieu of what other countries might be able to do in these circumstances, which is devalue the currency. Europe should privilege in its macroeconomic policies, including its monetary policy, growth in the course of the next several years, as distinct from inflation fighting. and this is a message for Germany more than anybody else. Europe needs to accelerate the pace at which it becomes a more unified economy. That means, on the one hand, even less impediments to movements of labor and capital, but more importantly, move towards closer coordination and monitoring of fiscal policy throughout the community, and examine ways in which transfers within Europe can be increased so as to help the more depressed regions or the more depressed localities deal with economic weakness, as happens in the United States. At the global level, the G20 has to continue to do its job of coordinating the exit from stimulus policies, improving financial regulation, and keeping markets open. This is the best recipe for ensuring that the global recovery is sustained. And in order to do all of this, Europe plays a crucial role, but the relationship between China and the United States is also critical. And communicating to the markets that there is a meeting of minds and there is a coordination among these big players is tremendously important for confidence. Sovereign debt crises typically come in environments of high debt and large fiscal deficits. But high debt and large fiscal deficits are usually not the main reason for a sovereign debt crisis. At the heart of most sovereign debt crises is a lack of confidence in the ability of the government to manage its fiscal affairs. In other words, a lack of confidence in the governance of the country. The 5 countries mentioned in one group, so to speak, are Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. None of these countries, including Greece, I believe, are likely to default. Default is almost unthinkable in the current context. Nevertheless, all of these countries face the common set of problems of high fiscal deficits and rapidly rising government debt, and all of them have a lot of work to do to fix the situation. That being said, as always, individual country situations are very different. We've talked about Greece. If I were to pass the group a little bit, I would say that Spain and Ireland are in a sense the best positioned because they have relatively low debt. There is a lot of confidence actually in their ability to manage their fiscal affairs. Ireland has already undertaken very significant steps. And both these countries have grown relatively rapidly in recent years. Now, it's been on the back of a big housing boom and immigration boom, but I think one has some confidence that even though growth after the crisis will be quite a bit slower, nevertheless these countries will continue to have the potential to grow out of their debt. Portugal and Italy, even though Italy is actually right now not in the focus of the markets because most recently their management of the fiscal deficit during the crisis has been probably amongst the most conservative in the EU. Nevertheless, Italy and Portugal both have suffered a very large loss of competitiveness and have shown little ability to grow at a relatively rapid rate sustainably, which is what you need in the end to come out of the debt trap. So in a sense, these two countries are the ones that perhaps give me greatest concern when you're looking in the medium term. And while Italy has done okay over the course of the crisis in terms of managing its fiscal affairs, the question remains longer term. And if you look at the governance indicators, for example, Italy and Portugal continue to have among the lowest scores in the EU. So there has to be a question in the longer term about Italy and Portugal's ability to grow out of this and the quality of their fiscal management. The worst case scenarios, which is highly unlikely, is a default by one or more of these countries, not immediately, but in the course of the next couple of years, and eventually some of them dropping out of the Eurozone. Again, I believe this is a low probability scenario, but it would be obviously a very bad scenario. The best that we can expect is a long and difficult period of structural, fiscal, and deflationary adjustment in the countries that we have mentioned that are most vulnerable in the periphery of Europe. Under either scenario, European growth will remain below that of the better placed country, the United States, certainly, in the course of the next several years.